Сразу после начала Великой Отечественной войны актеры, певцы, танцоры, артисты цирка начали записываться во фронтовые бригады. В обращении ко всем творческим работникам говорилось: где бы ни находились части нашей Красной Армии и Военно-Морского флота, работники искусств служат боевым средством победы над фашизмом и разделяют с бойцами фронтовую жизнь. Всего за годы Великой Отечественной войны было организовано около 4000 фронтовых бригад. В общей сумме было сыграно 1 350 000 спектаклей и концертов. В работе бригад приняло участие 42 000 актеров. Некоторые из них выступали на фронтах по нескольку сот раз. Концерты, спектакли игрались в непосредственной близости от фронта, иногда прямо во время боевых действий. И, конечно, артисты не только выступали. Отдельный и самый серьезный рассказ у нас пойдет о тех артистах, что сами прошли сквозь огонь и ад Великой Отечественной.
From the recollections of actor Vladimir Etush. Imagine, I was a young actor, only 18. And the year before the war was great for me. The wonderful Vakhtangov Theater, outstanding fellow actors, love affairs, nights out. And then, on June 22nd, 1941, at 5 a.m., I was walking through empty Moscow on my way back from yet another party. I went down Gorky Street to Monezhnaya Square and suddenly saw a huge black German embassy car rushing from the direction of the Kremlin. I still remember a flag with a swastika on it fluttering in the wind, but since I was just a naive boy then, I didn't think much of it. Only later did I realize that I was an unwitting witness to the passage of German Ambassador von der Schulenburg, who, just a few minutes prior, had given Molotov a memorandum informing him of the declaration of war on the Soviet Union. (1941 and 1942 were the hardest years. The enemy was pushed back 200 to 250 kilometers from Moscow. From the recollections of Vladimir Basov, 1942, Kaluga. The snow was 3 or 4 meters deep. We dug narrow trenches, and there were snowdrifts to the right and to the left of us, with virgin snow on the other side. So we were walking through that snowy passageway, and when we marched, we couldn't even feel our feet. It turned out you could even sleep for 50 to 60 meters while walking. A soldier could be walking and sleeping, and once he woke up, he'd suddenly be full of energy again. Now we live a good life, but back then, there was some kind of fusion. Your country, you, the trench, the enemy. In fact, I was a professional soldier, but during all 4 years of the war, I kept thinking about another profession, becoming a director, and I kept imagining how I'd make a movie about the front.
Я, очевидно, буду избавлен от строевой службы в Германии. По крайней мере, наши врачи это единодушно утверждают. Я бы отнюдь не возражал. Это облегчит нам возможность увидеться. Вживаться, вживаться, вживаться. Нужен Иоганн Вайс. Не нужен и еще долго будет не нужен Александр Белов.
The battle was short. And afterwards, we drank icy vodka, and I used my knife to pick out someone else's blood from under my nails. In 1941 and 1942, Yuri Nikulin was fighting near Leningrad. He recalled, "I saw Leningrad during the siege. The trams stopped. The houses got covered with snow and ice. The walls had smudges on them. Water and sewer systems didn't work. There were huge snowdrifts everywhere, with small paths between them on which people were walking, slowly, instinctively trying not to move too much. Everyone was bent over and hunched up, and a lot of them were stumbling from hunger. Some struggled to drag sleds with water and wood on them. Sometimes the sleds had dead bodies wrapped in sheets on them. You could also often see dead bodies in the streets, and no one was surprised. A person would be walking in the street, then suddenly stop and drop dead. It was scarier in Leningrad than it was on the front lines. I can't say I'm a very brave person. No, I was very scared sometimes. The shelling starts, and you can hear a shot, and then the sound of an approaching shell. And during those seconds that this shell is approaching, you're saying to yourself, that's it. That's my shell. But with time, this feeling dulls. But I could never forget the first person who was killed in front of me. We were sitting in a firing area, eating from our pots. Suddenly, a shell exploded right next to our gun. And the person who had been loading it got half of his head cut off by a shell fragment. There he was, sitting with a spoon in his hand, a steaming pot in front of him, and the top half of his head cleanly cut off, as by a razor. Vladimir Etush. As a lieutenant, I had to run with a gun in my hands, give orders to the machine gunners, and lie in defense in the line of soldiers. Once, when I was in such a line, the person next to me, one of the soldiers from our regiment, got wounded in his lung. He couldn't breathe, and I had to lift him to relieve his suffering. I tried to do it, and suddenly, his head fell onto my chest. Another bullet that was meant for me hit him. How could I ever forget that? Yuri Nikulin. Once, I was sitting in a hastily dug pit with shells exploding all around me, and not far from me in his trench was Volodya Borozdinov. He looked out and shouted, "Sergeant, come here." And as soon as I ran there to join him, a shell directly hit the position where I had been. How lucky I was that Borozdinov called me.
Года мои дети. Да и дома желательно бы побывать. Ведь у меня 4 детишек. И вот, понимаешь, год их не видел и забыл, какие они обличья. Про жену я уж не говорю, тут дело такое, что сразу слов подходящих не сыщешь. Только, признаться, тоже давно уже позабыл, как у нее под мышками пахнет.
Anatoly Papanov. I remember my first battle, in which out of 42 people, only 14 survived. I can still clearly see my friend, Alek Rafayevich, dropping dead. He studied at the Gerasimov Institute of Cinematography. He wanted to be a cinematographer. We were running next to each other and calling out to each other from time to make sure we were both alive. And suddenly I heard, Tolik. I looked back and saw Alek falling down. Someone next to me shouted, "What are you looking at? Keep running or you'll get hit too." I ran without thinking, and in my head I kept repeating, Alek is gone. Alek is gone. I still vividly remember this loss. But I also witnessed and discovered something else, an immense strength of mind, utmost self-sacrifice, and friendship among soldiers. It was fundamentally a test for a person. There was strict selection, and it was unthinkable for a frontline soldier not to share his last piece of food or his last smoke with his friends. It might seem like a small thing, but I don't even know how to describe that sacred feeling of brotherhood. I'm an actor, after all, not a writer, so it's easier for me to show something than to describe it.
Уметь помирать – это еще не все военное дело. Чтобы немцы помирали, вот что от нас требуется. Вот вы сейчас о смерти заговорили. И я вам скажу, чтобы вы меня до самых потрохов поняли. Умереть у всех на глазах я не боюсь. Я без вести пропасть не имею права.
I saw soldiers returning from battle, completely unrecognizable. I saw their hair turning gray in one night. Before that, I thought it was just a literary device, but turns out it's a war device. During the war, Papanov said, we learned the true power of art, and no speculation could ever replace that experience. Art helped us find inner peace, if only for a short while. And sometimes it quite literally helped our wounds heal. I remember from my frontline experience a hospital near Makhachkala. Its long hallways with beds and the loud voice, as if trying to contain unbridled joy, of Lydia Ruslanova singing Valenki, snow boots, you're old and worn, you're unwearable. They put on this record a few times in a row, and we knew that it was at the request of a soldier who was undergoing surgery. He urgently needed to have his leg amputated, but there were no anesthetics at the hospital. He agreed to have surgery without anesthesia, but he asked, put on the Valenki song.
Как же я любила по морозу босиком, к милому ходила. Два лимити.
Должен вытерпеть. А лишнего ничего не отрежем. Не беспокойся. Нам твоего не надо.
Inokente Smoktunovsky turned 18 in 1943 and was immediately sent to the Kursk salient. During the forced crossing of the Dnieper, he was given the task to deliver a package to the division headquarters. In order to get there, he had to cross the river. But as soon as he entered the water, the Germans noticed him and started shooting at him. He was sputtering, going underwater, resurfacing, and going under again. But in the end, he made it. His partner was killed, but he delivered the package. He was nominated for a bravery medal for this, but received it only 49 years later. After the Dnieper incident, he was captured, but then escaped and returned to the front line. He received his second bravery medal after, during the liberation of Lortzen village. The company of guards of Junior Sergeant Smoktanovsky was the first to enter the enemy's trench and destroy more than 20 fascists. That is, they shot, crushed, and choked them to death. Remember the poem by the poet Yulia Drunina. I saw hand-to-hand combat just once when awake, and 100 times in my dreams. Those who claim war is not scary have no idea of war. Gunshots from the other side of the street, hysterically sputtering in a flurry of bullets, cut through the windows and doors of our house. No one expected it. Everyone jumped up and started getting their weapons ready. A squeaking, howling, screeching, whistling, rattling, frenzied medley of explosions, suddenly whistling in the clatter of shell fragments on the tiles, dust and soil falling down from the broken ceiling of a shed. Looks like they were really going at it. And in the next moment, the whole yard suddenly turned into a blindingly bright, exploding world. The night gave way to a horrifying carnival. The shadows of sheds and a huge tree thrashed around in a devilish dance, colliding with each other. The yard was groaning with the sounds of mortars and shells exploding. Fire! Grenades! Someone rasped out from the darkness behind my back. One after another, they were flying towards the screaming, pale darkness. But it couldn't save us anymore. That was it. The end. Suddenly, we saw fire and heard gunshots next to us. Losing our minds from despair, and with a sudden flickering hope of survival, we shouted something in crazy, wild voices, something that remotely resembled, "Hooray!" The black avalanche stumbled and split into two parts. Lying on the ground, we screamed, this time in a more determined and imposing manner. I've never heard a wilder scream in my life. We couldn't see the pale gray smudges of faces anymore, and the black mass was falling apart and disappearing in the dark. For how long? But at least for now, our village and our lives were saved. Let the living remember, and let generations know this harsh truth of the soldiers, won by force. And your crutches, and deadly puncture wound, and the graves over the Volga, where thousands of young soldiers lie. This is our fate. With it, we argued and sang, went into attack, and blew up the bridges over the Bug. Do not pity us. After all, we pitied no one. But standing before Russia, our conscience is clear in tough times. Anatoly Papanov. They formed a new regiment from the survivors and sent them back to the same place. There, the rumbling was always so loud that sometimes we couldn't hear ourselves. But one morning, it was absolutely quiet. And suddenly we heard cock-a-doodle-doo. Some rooster started singing out of habit. How could it survive such a fire? But it meant that life was carrying on.
Мы расстанемся с тобой, клен зеленый, да клен кудрявый, да раскудрявый резной. Раскудрявый, клен зеленый, лист резной, здесь у клена. Мы расстанемся с тобой, клен зеленый, да клен кудрявый, да раскудрявый резной.
Кузнечик, Я. Иди к командиру. Настроение. О!
Alexei Smirnov, who later became a beloved and well-known actor, was at that time a chemical warfare specialist. Later, he was commander of a firing platoon in the 3rd Artillery Battery of the 169th Mortar Oder Red Banner Order of the Suvorov and Bogdan Khmelnytsky Regiment. He was awarded multiple medals. The award sheet for his Bravery Medal from July 22, 1943, says that while on reconnaissance, he personally shot 3 Nazis with a machine gun. On March 4, 1944, during the breakthrough of German defenses near Anatskovtsy village, Smirnov and his platoon destroyed the mortar battery and the medium machine gun together with the gunning crew. For his courage in these battles, he was awarded the Order of the Red Star. On July 20th of the same year, 40 Germans tried to push Smirnov's platoon from one of the high grounds. Smirnov rushed into the attack with his personal weapon, inspiring his fellow soldiers. As a result, the Germans lost 17 soldiers, and Smirnov personally captured 7 people. A week later, when they were picking new firing positions at Zhuravka village, he and 3 of his fellow soldiers ran into an enemy group of 16 people. The Nazis tried to capture the Soviet soldiers, but that's not how it turned out. In a quick fight, 4 soldiers, including Smirnov, killed 9 Germans and captured 5. For his personal courage in this battle, Smirnov was awarded the Order of Glory, 3rd class.
Краски не хватает. А как у вас? Может пригодится? Краску оставь!
From the recollections of Vladimir Etush. I was taking part in the interrogation of a captured Nazi, and it went on for a very long time. Afterwards, I was so tired that when I went out in the freezing air, I only wanted one thing, to find a place to sleep. So I entered the closest hut in our camp and was stupefied. In that warm, heated room, captured Germans were sleeping alongside our commanders. 2 Germans were snoring on an iron bed, and at their feet, across the bed, slept our commander. And next to them on the floor, the head of regimental intelligence. And on his, buttocks, there was the head of another captured German, who was also asleep. As if there was no war, no enemies and opponents. They were just exhausted, bone-tired people sleeping side by side. From Yuri Nikulin's recollections, it would seem that a night before a battle would be restless, but we slept like logs because we had spent the whole day digging and constructing things. There were 7 people sleeping in our dugout, and in the morning, we felt some punches and pushes. We opened our eyes and saw our reconnaissance officer running on top of our bodies, shouting. "Ah!" We looked at him and wondered if he had gone crazy. But it turned out, Borozdinov was actually shouting, "Hooray!" because he was the first to find out from the telephone operator on duty that the German troops had signed a declaration of surrender. And that was how the victory came. Vladimir Basov. When people ask me what I remember best about the war, I always say it's the people. Here are the ruthless statistics of the time. People of my age, students who graduated in 1941, had the highest odds of dying on the front line. But we were lucky in one thing. Life toughened us up. I had to survive, and when I remember the war, no matter how hellish it was, I consider it the greatest time in my life. The war was my university, and my generation received our true certificates of maturity at the walls of the Reichstag.